do go into a lot of detail about Vajpayee's relationship with Mrs. Kaul, and the fact that she was his, in a way, soulmate, even though she was married to someone else, and they all lived together. And I think, and you give vivid details of that. And the fascinating thing that comes out is the RSS, while taking a moral stand on it, and also getting a lot of complaints from others within the RSS family, because of the fact that he promised them a road to power and to political victory, that they were kind of, they compromised on it. So tell us a little bit about those details.
So, well, one is that, I mean, look, Sunetra, you've been a senior journalist for a long time, right? So what I'm saying in details are new. The fact is not new that, that Vajpayee and Mrs. Kaul, first Rajkumari, she was called Rajkumari Haksar initially, first met in Gwalior. They were 16 and 17. It was 1941. There was love. It was very innocent, small town love. It didn't fructify. I suspect there was family opposition. She was a second cousin of Indira Gandhi, right, through Nehru's wife. And they meet again in 1957, several years later. Vajpayee is now 34. He's a new MP, newly minted MP. And Rajkumari Kaul since has got married to a gentleman who's a professor at Ramjas College in Delhi. And then, the relationship continues, right? But more than the private salacious part, the way I wanted to focus on Rajkumari Kaul was she was an enormously intellectual, confident woman, right? And she played a huge role in liberalizing Vajpayee, right? I think that's, and I worry that everybody knows about this story, but because in India we are a patriarchal society, we don't like to talk about it. What we do is whisper. Let's not whisper about it. Let's be honest about it, but let's give her credit as a remarkable 20th century figure in the history of the BJP, right? To give you a quote from a former BJP chief minister who told me this, Rajkumari Kaul was not just an intellectual influence on Vajpayee, she was also his B team. So suppose somebody, from the BJP went and spoke to Vajpayee and Vajpayee was a little curt, then immediately, Rajkumari Kaul would step in, would call the person, would say, look, it's all okay. If anybody in the larger RSS or BJP wanted to go to AIIMS hospital, right, she would, get them into AIIMS. She knew and I found out that part of the reason was that she always wanted to be a doctor. But because she was a woman, in that early time, so this was one way in which she sublimated as well as got respectable, because she knew very well the kind of whispers that were going on, right? I also point out that in the RSS in 1965 have a meeting about Mrs. Kaul because people like Balraj Madhok have been complaining, right? And many in the RSS were okay with it, saying that, look, it's not anybody else's problem, right? Like Bhausao Devras. But Golwalkar, who unlike other satsang chalaks, is a much more religious figure, religious man, right? He wants Vajpayee to break off. And to Vajpayee's credit, in my view, he says no, right? He says, not your problem. And, I would say that Rajkumari Kaul won that battle because when she passed away some years ago, at her funeral, right, it was senior RSS leaders were present, right? And when Vajpayee passed away in 2018, it was Mrs. Kaul's daughter, Namita Gunnu, who lit the funeral pyre, a woman, right? And Mrs. Kaul's daughter who lit the funeral pyre. And the RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, was watching. Ultimately, they had to accept Mrs. Kaul's primacy in Vajpayee's life. And I think India, needs to know and celebrate Mrs. Kaul rather than just whispering about her in the corners.
So Shaurya Doval, come in on this. I want to ask you, was that just one rare instance which the RSS is not going to, because we know how, as an outsider and a journalist and observer, the RSS is, of course, just, comprises, just has men. And so, can you tell us about how the RSS would be about a relationship like this now? Would it also be accommodating, or was that just an exception?
Okay, so I have there is nothing I can comment on what Vinay has said or on this aspect because I have no facts or no basis or I have no data to speak on this. But I'll try to answer your second question, and I can only answer from the limited experience that I have had. Of course, I haven't. I think of the Sangh as a place that hasn't have don't doesn't interfere in the personal lives of people. You see, it is not. I mean, at least I haven't seen people talking about people and their personal lives, or interfering with them as far as their professional duties are concerned. People may have difference of opinions, etc. But this is not the culture of the organization. And when you said as an outsider, we think about it and we think it's a very male dominated, or whatever conceptions people have about the RSS. I think many of them are extremely misplaced. Now, over the time, one could argue whether the Sangh should have gone out and tried to explain itself, and maybe in the last few years it has been trying to do that, but historically it hasn't done. But Sangh is extremely progressive on many of the issues, and one of the things that at least I haven't experienced in it is the fact that you find too many people interfering in each other's personal lives and making viewpoints. As I said, the glue that binds most of us is an ideological cause, is nationalism, is some larger vision of ourselves, and in that we understand that there are people with different personal choices that people make. So I don't see this as an issue either way, where though Vinay has tried to bring in the role of the Sangh, what role this would have had.
Well, he of
So
course
to that
points out in
extent,
the book that he asked them to break off the relationship. But Vinay, do
No,
you think this
Sumitra, I also point out that within the RSS there was a difference of opinion on this. Nanaji Deshmukh, for example, who I have heard, I have to verify, also introduced Shatrughan Sinha to his wife. So he was a matchmaker within the Sangh, right? And a remarkable figure. There's a reason
introducing someone to their wife is not supporting a relationship which is out of wedlock.
But he did. He told Golwalkar that, look, let them get married, right? He pushed back. He said, let them get married, right? So you see difference of opinion. And Sunetra, you are also saying the role of women in the BJP. I think one of the most forgotten BJP figures is Vijayaraje Scindia, right? And I think we must mention now, both Vajpayee and Advani are remarkable politicians, but they were not mass leaders in the sense neither of them could win a state, right? Unlike Narendra Modi, they couldn't win a state, right? Advani understood the cadre, Vajpayee understood parliament, right? And he was a mesmerizing speaker. It was people like Vijayaraje Scindia who were the mass leaders of the Jansangh and then the BJP. She could win Madhya Pradesh, right? And what I find remarkable, Sunetra, is that she, even though she was so pivotal to the RSS and BJP, even though she was always the RSS candidate to replace Vajpayee, she said no. She said, they are like my brothers, I won't go against them, right? And the only position she reached at the end of it was vice president of the BJP, which is quite lowly, right? And I asked her daughter, and I quote this in the book, I asked Vasundhara Raje, why did your mother never demand more from the BJP, right? And she thought about it and she said, my mother is used to doing this, which is giving, not doing this, which is taking, right? And I think that exemplifies this sense of self-sacrifice. What, the quote I have for her is Atma Vilopan, that makes the BJP different and other parties can learn from.
By asking you, one of the first things that I learned in this book, which was surprising to me because I was a new reporter when the BJP government came in 99. And, I remember being a trainee and covering the election campaign as well. And while I was a journalist then, I think what came as a surprise to me was how you track the relationship between L.K. Advani and Atal Bihari Vajpayee. I don't think I realized how much of a love-hate relationship it really was. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Sunita, I think the first thing your viewers and readers should know about this book is that Hindustan Times was Vajpayee's favorite newspaper, favorite English newspaper. He read in Hindi, but he was not that comfortable speaking in English, but he would read the English newspaper. And, in the Vajpayee household, mornings would be Vajpayee having some tea, his Pomeranians around him, and reading Hindi newspapers. But when it came to English, it was the Hindustan Times. Now, one of the things that I found remarkable about the Vajpayee-Advani relationship was that, look, if you look at the three of us and, when we have relationships that are 40 years with, parents, with, spouses, with friends, it'll have ups and downs, right? Nonetheless, this survived, so they were like an old couple squabbling in the park. They never divorced. And what I think is the most remarkable thing about this relationship, Sunetra, is that it began with hierarchy, which is that in 1957, Deen Dayal Upadhyay orders Advani, who's in the RSS in Rajasthan, to work as secretary to Vajpayee, because Vajpayee has just become a Jansangh MP and he needed an English-speaking type, right? A Macaulay Putra, and Advani was very much that person, a missionary-educated man, to navigate Lutyens Delhi for Vajpayee. And from 1968 to 1986, it was Vajpayee who was boss and Advani reported to him. From 1986 to 1995, the roles were reversed. Advani ran the party. He was the face of the Rath Yatra, the Ayodhya movement, and Vajpayee reported to him. And once again, from 95 to 2004, the roles were reversed with Vajpayee at the top. I haven't come across any relationship in modern India where the hierarchy was switched not once but twice. And Sunetra, as you know, this is a country in which, when you're about to become foreign secretary, if you're quote unquote superseding somebody 1 or 2 batches senior to you, they all resign. We are so hierarchy and status conscious that to see a relationship that is able to switch hierarchy twice is quite remarkable. And that is really the spine of the book through which I tell you the 80 years or the 100 years that preceded Narendra Modi. So if you want to understand this moment, you got to begin in the 1920s.
I want you to address how the Modi-Shah relationship is different or similar to the Vajpayee-Advani kind of dynamic.
Right. So I end the book with that, but I also say it's speculative. See, because I'm an academic, so I need 20 years distance. So this is still evolving, right? I think one similarity is that, the point that Shaurya makes, that, they may be, when there's fights, there's disagreements, there's no divorce, right? There is a similarity. And, whatever you say about Modi, he shows respect, at least he has visual respect, to those in the past, even if he sidelines them when it comes to power, right? That's not just superficiality, it matters, right? So that's one similarity. I would say a couple of differences. One is, my sense is that Amit Shah and Modi would agree more than disagree. They're fundamentally cut off the same cloth. You put them in the room, they have similar instincts. Vajpayee and Advani had very different instincts, right? So on any issue, they brought different perspectives, right? Now you could say one was an Nehruvian, the moderate hardliner. I think the truth is a little more complicated. They were both play acting, but they were fundamentally different people. And Advani in particular was a Macaulay Putra. He was an English-speaking type. He didn't know even Hindi before he came to India in 1947-48. He went to St. Patrick's School, and as you pointed out, I mentioned in the book, he's probably the only man to join the RSS after a tennis game, right? So very different social background from Vajpayee. Amit Shah and Modi, even though Amit Shah comes from a richer background than Modi, his father was a PVC trader in PVC pipes, and Narendra Modi comes from a truly poor background. I think their instincts are the same, right? I think that's definitely one very big difference. The other is that, and I mentioned this in the book, from 1957 itself, when Vajpayee was 34, he enters parliament and he is more or less unbroken for the next 50 odd years, right? So his prism of the world is Central Hall of Parliament, and he's very sensitive to what opposition parties think, right? On the other hand, Amit Shah and Modi did not hold a single job in Delhi before 2014, right? And as a consequence, they don't have to cater to the political diversity of India. Advani and Vajpayee had to. And that's a second big difference between the two of them.
One of the things that you mention is the fact that Nusli Wadia, Jinnah's grandson, is, he was one of the original people who donated and was one of the major kind of financial supporters of the Jansangh and the BJP till 2004. In fact, you pointed in the book how Nanaji Deshmukh would go and stay there in his house in Bombay. And not just that, for everyone watching, what's fascinating is that he also gave pocket money to Vajpayee when he didn't have any source of income when he was out of parliament, right? So tell us a little bit more about that. And of course, then perhaps Shaurya Doval can tell us about how the financial status of the BJP has changed from that of a modest party and now the richest party, perhaps.
Sunetra, I can't make this up. Jinnah's grandson is the single biggest funder, or not the single biggest, but the biggest funder of the BJP from roughly the early 70s to all the way till 98. Because once the BJP is in the cusp of power, then all the corporates are running, right, to them. The greatness of Nanaji Deshmukh and of Nasli Wadia is that they supported the Jansangh and the BJP when they were down, right? And by the time Pramod Mahajan, becomes the money face of the BJP in the early 90s, all the Bombay corporates realized that the BJP has to come to power and we have to hedge our bets. That makes Nasli Wadia even more remarkable. He also supported them during the emergency, right? And they had and he used to consider someone like Nanaji Deshmukh like his uncle or his father. And I can't tell you how different the social backgrounds of these two are. Nanaji Deshmukh wears a dhoti, speaks halting English. Nasli Wadia is one of the richest families in India and the grandson of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah had just one daughter who he disinherited, who married, and the daughter married a Wadia. Jinnah himself married one of the richest Parsi families, the Petits. And of course, and Nasli remained behind, and he was completely anglicized. And it's a remarkable story, right? It's an absolutely remarkable. Now, in the BJP, people know about it, but the irony is just so delicious that I wish there's a book just on that question. Sadly, Nasli refused to meet me. I tried a lot, right? So I met many of the people close to him who were handling his finances, etc., etc. But as a journalist, how important it is to get the primary source. I failed with that. Answering the second question a little bit, and then I'll leave it to Shaurya to answer that. The money situation for the BJP changes in the early 90s. Until then, they were a poor party. They were very careful. And the reason for that is obvious, that corporate India only cares for political parties that are winning, right? And the BJP only comes to that in the early 90s. And I do write there that I think Pramod Mahajan is a bit maligned. He was seen as a flashy money man. But frankly, Vajpayee-Advani knew what he was doing, right? And they wouldn't have kept him there had he not, if he was taking money for himself, it was money taken for the party, right? But, someone like Nanaji, the Jugalbandi of Nanaji and Nasli Wadia is, if possible, even more interesting than the Vajpayee-Advani one. The two of them being the fundraisers of the BJP coming from such unalike social backgrounds is really quite remarkable.
Shaurya Doval, what do you think that, I'm sure that you think the BJP would like this word to get around, that their initial funders, their initial financial supporter was Jinnah's grandson?
I will answer it like this, that at every point in time, there are enough people in this country who believe that if they believe that you're doing something for a cause, they come out and support you. It may well have happened that Mr. Wadia and others like him probably thought. I'll tell you from my own example. I started a think tank in 2009, the year the BJP lost the election, and there was no prospect of the BJP ever coming to power at that point in time, right? And I always say this: we've never, even a think tank is a small thing. We've never had a resource problem. We've always had a capability problem. People enough to work. Somebody or the other said, "Acha kaam kar rahe hain aap desh ke liye. Kariye. We will support you." So parties like the BJP, ideological movements, they go through ups and downs. Sometimes they are in power, sometimes they are out of power. But there is a section of people in this country who identify with the nationalism and the work that and the ideals that the BJP stands for. So I am not surprised, and they are the most unassuming people. You will probably never hear about them if you probably had not written this book. Who felt that something wrong? Maybe Mr. Wadia actually did feel. I mean, just because he is.
No, I think he did. No, but I think he had a visceral dislike for the Congress party, and he had personal relations with Vajpayee-Advani, but most importantly, Nanaji Deshmukh, Ramnath Goenka. So I would buy that. Like, especially, for example, he also funded Nanaji Deshmukh when he fights with Vajpayee and leaves on Vanvas to Chitrakoot. Some of that money comes from Nasli himself, right? What I didn't know is what is Nasli's relationship with the current Jugalbandi. I don't know that. But quite frankly, if the BJP should be very, very grateful that here was this one businessman who stuck with them, a flashy English-speaking businessman who stuck with them when the chips were down. And now that the chips are up, they should be a little grateful.
No, Vinay, that is the mistake we make. That is the mistake. We try to judge a book by its cover, which we should. Just because somebody wears a suit or a flashy thing doesn't make him more or less or just somebody wears a dhoti doesn't make him less progressive, or less smart. It is sometimes a lot of people, as you started the conversation, come into this movement from different streams.